ねえ、ここはユートピアなのかな、それとも地獄?
The date is September 9th, 2021 at the time of this recording. So today, I'm here to talk about the anime series Sonny Boy, written and directed by Natsume Shingo, produced by Funimation, and created by the animation studio Madhouse. Sonny Boy is the story of 36 Japanese junior high school students who one day find themselves mysteriously teleported to an alternate dimension and their journey to find their way back home. As of making this video, Sonny Boy has currently aired 9 episodes out of 12. This video is going to be based off the first 7 episodes. So the purpose of this video is not to go through episodically and explain each episode one by one, but rather, I'm going to attempt to explain what's been happening in the show overall, what the show is really about, and at the end I'm going to try and speculate on what will happen throughout the remainder of the show. Granted, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen Sonny Boy yet, pause here and go check out the show. So, if you're like me and you've been watching Sonny Boy each week, you might have been scratching your head trying to make heads or tails of what's been going on in each episode. We've had kids with reality warping superpowers, an invisible monkey baseball league, talking animals, and to top it all off, we're constantly teleported to new worlds with new rules each episode. It all seems like a drug-induced haze with seemingly no through line. Nothing seems connected, yet at the same time everything kind of feels connected. So how can we explain what's going on? So to understand what's happening, we're first going to have to break the show down into 2 separate lines of thought, the narrative and meta-narrative. When we're thinking about the narrative, we're going to be examining the meaning of the plot within the broader context of the story. It's what's actually happening in the show. It's what's actually playing out on the television screen. The second line of thought, the meta-narrative, is going to be the story within the story. It's going to be the greater conversation the show is attempting to have with us, the audience. So, we're going to start first with the narrative, and then we're going to see how it relates to the larger conversation or meta-narrative that the director's trying to have with us, the audience. Alright, so with all that out of the way, what is Sonny Boy about? Well, to answer that, the first thing we need to do is figure out what is Sonny Boy's main theme. A theme is the inferred stance taken on a central topic or message of a story. Now that we know what a theme is, looking over the entire span of Sonny Boy, what is the lesson or moral we are meant to take away from this particular story?
僕だってあんな家だけど本当に帰りたいと思ってるんだ。
立つんだ。まだ間に合う。
At its core, Sonny Boy is a show about the transition from being a passive participant in life to an active member of society. It's about the change from child to adult, the ability to change one's behavior, the power to change society, and potentially change the future. In one way, shape, or form, every episode hits on this central idea of change. And we're going to prove it by taking a deeper look at the 5 key elements of Sonny Boy. Who is Sonny Boy about? Where does Sonny Boy take place? What is our central conflict? What is the plot? And finally, what is our resolution? Who is Sonny Boy about? Who's driving the story? Who is affected? Who stands to win? Who stands to lose? Any guesses? Well, we know the show is about 36 different students. However, Sonny Boy really only focuses on a handful of those kids, and only one of those happens to have a direct impact on the show. In fact, every episode is a reflection of this character and his internal struggle. Have you figured out who it is yet? From screen time alone, it's pretty easy to guess that Nagara is the main character of Sonny Boy. And never has there been a clearer protagonist in my mind than him. His central conflict is the embodiment of the show's main theme. But who is Nagara and what is his central conflict? On the surface, Nagara is a non-assuming 9th grader. Most would describe him as a very agreeable person. He doesn't like to cause problems for others, and his class would probably refer to him as somebody who's very easy to get along with. However, Nagara has a problem. He is unable to assert himself, and he feels stuck in life. As the central protagonist of Sonny Boy, this actually makes him an incredibly difficult character to watch. At the start of the show, he's so passive that he might as well not even exist. He's submissive to the point of fault. He cannot and will not go against another person's wishes. But that's the point. If the show is about change, then Nagara is the perfect vehicle to drive home this idea. In order to progress through life, people have to make decisions. They have to decide where they want to go, who they want to date, and even who they want to be. The decisions you make will undoubtedly change who you are as a person. Right now, Nagara isn't able to do any of that, even when he's directly questioned by other characters in the show. This leaves him feeling trapped, like he's frozen in place. Some might even refer to this as being stuck in a state of stasis. Sound familiar? This inability to choose is mirrored in the broader setup of the show, with the students physically being stuck in an alternate reality in a literal state of stasis. Nagara needs to change from a passive participant in life to actively shaping his own world. So, hypothetically, if you were making a show where the characters are both physically stuck in stasis and metaphorically stuck in stasis, where would you have the show primarily take place? Where would you put the characters to really drive home this idea that they're stuck? How about, I don't know, how about a desert island? Brilliant, of course it's a desert island. I couldn't think of a better place. Now not only are the characters physically stuck, they're metaphorically trapped. Why is this important? In fiction, when characters are marooned on an island, it usually puts a pause on their life, where once they had a set path, now they are forced to reevaluate where that path was headed. They have to figure out how to survive, leading them to think about what's truly important to them. Usually this results in a change of character. As an example, I don't know, let's say we had a guy who's a very career-oriented individual. They may discover the importance of relationships. Typically, who a person is before they land on the island is not who they are when they leave. Having the island be the main setting of the story is a great tool to show transformation or change. Now I know Sonny Boy takes place in a bunch of different locations, but primarily the students always return back to this idea of the island. That's because they are still stuck in stasis, they're still marooned in the ocean of nothingness that is life. What major issue are the characters trying to resolve? The answer is the students have been stranded, both physically and metaphorically. They've been teleported to a different reality, one where they do not age, they cannot die, and they will not grow. This is a reflection of Nagara's internal struggle and is significant because they've been plucked out of a key point in their lives. They are at an age where they are making the change from adolescence to adulthood, only now they cannot make that transition. These teenagers cannot grow to be adults. They're stuck in stasis. So what does that have to do with change? Change is an act of transformation. It is an active state of motion. Stasis is the opposite. It is a static state. It only makes sense that the central conflict of our story will be the exact opposite of our main theme. If you are in stasis, you are not moving, you cannot grow, and you certainly cannot change. Now that we have defined our protagonist, setting, and central conflict, let's briefly examine Sonny Boy's plot. To start off, plot is the story that the show revolves around. There's actually two separate storylines running throughout Sonny Boy. The main storyline revolves around Nagara and some of the other students' attempt at returning home. Its primary goal is to resolve the main conflict of being stranded. The secondary storyline, or the subplot, revolves around Hoshi and some of the other students' attempt at re-establishing society. This storyline explores an alternative solution to being stuck, but in doing so, works in opposition to resolving the main conflict. After all, they are just accepting their situation and are trying to live in stasis. Hoshi and the other students want to stay, but Nagara needs to leave. Both of these plot lines run parallel to each other and will often intersect, creating friction and intertwining storylines. Let's take it a step further. Everything that happens in the show, everything that moves the plot forward, revolves around Nagara and his decisions. Most of the episodes will start out with the core characters trying to find a way home. Only Nagara will either be lying around or following the orders of other students. Usually this will continue on for the majority of each episode until inevitably things go south in one form or another. It's only when Nagara finally chooses to do something of his own free will that tensions are alleviated. This is on purpose. Why? Because Nagara is our protagonist and the main conduit for our theme of change. And coincidentally, Nagara is the only one with the ability to change worlds. Good, bad, or indifferent, as the main character, he has to make the decision in order for his story to progress and subsequently for the world to change. If he doesn't, everything will go up in flames. Nagara has to change. He cannot lie on the floor forever doing nothing. Eventually, he has to participate in life if he's going to live. The resolution to a story is the solution to our central conflict. Because Sonny Boy hasn't finished airing yet, we can only speculate on how the show is going to end. I'm going to get into more specifics later on, but for now we can make an assumption based off of our central conflict. So again, because our central conflict is the students are stranded on another world in a state of stasis, we can only assume that they're going to be returned home to the real world or world resembling the real world and resume their lives. We can also speculate that Nagara will start taking a more active role in his own life. In summary, we established the show's main theme of change and identified the 5 key story elements of Sonny Boy. We discussed that Sonny Boy was about Nagara and his internal conflict of being unable to act. We established that the main conflict of the story was stasis. We identified that the story takes place in various isolated locations with an emphasis on the island. We briefly examined the main plotline of escaping stasis and the subplot of changing society. And finally, we speculated on a resolution. Now that we've discussed the main narrative is about change and the idea of taking action in one's own life, what is our meta-narrative about? What larger conversation is the director trying to have with us, the audience? So this next part's really cool, and it's something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. In fact, it's the whole reason why I made this video. To start off, I wanted to pose the question again, what is Sonny Boy about? But remember, this time we're going to try to think about it in terms of a larger message. What is the overall greater meaning of the show? The answer is you. The show is all about you, the viewer. Allow me to explain. Oftentimes when we watch TV shows or movies, the protagonist is just a surrogate for the audience at home. We live vicariously through the characters as they experience the events of the story. Usually this is just a byproduct of how shows work, but in Sonny Boy, Natsume Shingo has made Nagara a literal representation of the audience. When you've been watching Sonny Boy, have you noticed anything out of place? Yes, the show does have a bunch of fantastical elements taking place, but have you noticed anything distinct that takes you out of the show? Something abrupt that breaks your concentration? I'm going to give you a hint. Isn't it weird how extreme this close-up on Nozomi's eyes are? This happens on a regular basis. It's like she's looking into your soul. So why does this happen? What is the deeper meaning of this shot? This occurs because Nozomi is not only speaking to Nagara, she's directly speaking to you, the viewer. We only see this close-up when the subject of taking action occurs or when the director wishes to convey a direct message. Her eyes are staring directly at you to see if you're paying attention. In fact, at several points in the show, characters will directly and indirectly break the fourth wall. This occurs when Natsume Shingo wants to directly challenge the viewer. But what is Shingo trying to convey? Now that we know that Nagara is a direct representation of us, let's re-examine him in the context of the greater meta conversation. So we know Nagara's biggest issue is that he's a passive participant in life. Why did they fail in episode 6? They failed because they did not create a new world. They only observed potential outcome. If we are Nagara, we are only observing what's taking place in the show. We are a passive participant in our own life, but like Nagara, we have the power to change worlds. Natsume Shingo is literally challenging us, the audience, to make a new world. That is why the main protagonist's biggest issue is that he is passive. That's why the show takes place in various isolated locations. That is why the main conflict is stasis. That is why the main subplot is about society. And that is why Nagara has the power to make worlds. We shape our own realities, but in order to do so, we have to change our own behavior. We have to stop lying around and watching time go by. We have to take action. In order to make a better world, we have to move. What kind of a better world remains to be seen, but that is what Natsume Shingo is challenging us to do. That is the point of Sonny Boy.
自分を証明しようと世界に立ち向かってるあの長良がだよ。
Now comes the fun part. Now we can try and speculate on how the rest of the events of Sonny Boy will take place. Now I know that by the time I actually finish this video, episode 9 has already aired, but hopefully I will be able to finish this before episode 10. Knowing our central theme, the 5 main story elements, and the overall message of the show, what can we guess will happen in the remaining episodes? What is going to be our resolution? Well, where are we currently structure-wise in terms of the show? Like everything else, Sonny Boy can be placed into a 3-act structure format. What is a 3-act structure? A 3-act structure is a model of breaking a story down into 3 distinct parts. Act 1, the setup or the beginning. Act 2, confrontation or the middle. Act 3, the resolution or the end. Almost every story, regardless of medium, is going to follow this structure. We're going to break the structure into more specific story beats so we can place the events of the story. If you are already familiar with story structure, I'll put a timestamp on the screen that you can skip to. Act 1. The first story beat is going to be the setup. This is where we're introduced to our characters, we set up our main conflict, and we set up the main theme of the show. Story beat number 2, the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is usually what pulls the characters out of their normal world and puts them on a path of adventure. Sometimes this is called the catalyst. Number 3, the debate. After the inciting incident, the protagonist must make a choice to either go on an adventure or try to solve the main conflict. Most of the time, they initially refuse to do anything or go on the adventure. Story beat number 4, the turning point. This story beat is when the protagonist decides to actually engage in the larger journey. This is when they usually begin the adventure. Act 2. Story beat number 5, introduce the subplot. This story beat is the beginning of the second act. It's where our adventure starts and where various subplots begin. Story beat number 6 is the midpoint. This is where things in the story start to ramp up. This is where the various characters, plot points, and subplots all start bumping into one another. Usually this is where a climactic battle occurs and the hero will experience a damaging loss. Story beat number 7 is going to be our all is lost story beat. At this point, the characters fail at their plan to solve the central conflict. All hope is lost. It doesn't seem like they're going to win. Story beat number 8 going to be a new plan. This story beat is where the characters rally. This is where the characters pick themselves up and create a new plan to solve the main conflict. Act 3. Story beat number 9 will be the climax of our story. This is where the main hero uses their new plan to resolve the events of the story. This is usually the final battle between hero and villain. Story beat number 10 is going to be our final outcome. This is where the events of the climax come to an end. This is where our story winds down and things finally return to normal, the characters returning back to their lives. Alright, so with all that in mind, let's break Sonny Boy down into 3 acts. Starting off, the first thing we're going to do is place episodes 1 and 2 into the first act of the show. These 2 episodes are the initial setup to the events of Sonny Boy, so for that, we're going to put them in Act 1. For Act 2, we'll place episodes 3 through 10. More specifically, episodes 3, 4, and 5 are the characters experiencing the world. It's here that we're introduced to several subplots. Besides the beginning of the show and the end of the show, the midpoint in the show is going to be the easiest story beat to pick out. And for Sonny Boy, that's clearly episode 6. It's clearly the midpoint of the show. Not only is it halfway through the show, but the show ramps up to a climactic confrontation and then the heroes lose. Episode 7 is the all is lost, dark night of the soul point of the show. Nagara is literally placed in an underworld or hell, mirroring the group's failure at escaping. At the time of this video, I haven't watched any episodes past episode 7, so this next part is all speculation. But based off of all the previous information, episodes 8, 9, 10 are going to focus on the characters rallying on a new plan of escape. This will leave episodes 11 and 12 to have our final confrontation and wrap up our story. So to summarize everything, Act 1 will be episodes 1 and 2, Act 2 is going to be episodes 3 through 10, and Act 3 will be episodes 11 and 12. Now that we have a roadmap of the show, what will happen throughout its remainder? In my opinion, here's how I think the rest of the show is going to play out. Again, this will all be purely speculation, and obviously, I could be wrong. I can't predict the future, but nevertheless, here's what I think is going to happen. In episodes 8, 9, and 10, the show will reiterate Nagara's main struggle. We're going to reiterate the main conflict of the show, and it will touch on the society subplot. During these episodes, Nagara's going to develop a new plan to create/return to the students back to their own world. He will more than likely need the other students or the power holdovers in order to do so. As they get closer to enacting this plan, the members of Miss Aki's group and possibly Beatnik will start to rally. At the same time, Hoshi and his group of students will return in some manner or fashion. In episodes 11 and 12, our heroes are going to metaphorically clash with the villains as they attempt to implement Nagara's plan. Miss Aki will have a competing idea of some kind to save everyone. She'll probably use Asakaze. This plan is going to fail. It's going to be a false victory. The other students are going to realize the plan will fail in some fashion. Either it'll be right away or it'll be delayed realization. This is going to cause an upheaval amongst the students. This is going to be revealed that Hoshi is going to be the principal in some way, and that he has been manipulating the other students through various means. This will cause the other students to turn on him and potentially result in his death. Nagara will then enact his plan, but he may require the help from the other students to do so. More specifically, I think he'll need Asakaze, Mizuho, and Nozomi to save everyone. Asakaze will have a moral dilemma about assisting Nagara. He's probably going to have his ego shattered, but he's ultimately going to decide to help him. Nagara will ultimately achieve his goal of creating a new world. I believe that it's going to be ultimately revealed, or at least heavily implied, that most of the events of the show have taken place in Nagara's mind. The show will end on a variation of the events that we are shown in episode 6. So why do I think this is going to happen? Let's start with the ending. Structurally speaking, the remaining episodes are going to have to cover the new plan, the climax, and the final outcome story beats. If Sonny Boy wants to have a satisfactory ending, we're going to have to resolve the central conflict and our main character's internal conflict, which means the students are going to have to return to the real world or some variation of it. But what does the real world look like? So we've been shown glimpses, but in order to answer that, let's look at the events prior to the show starting. In episode 1, we are told that the students went adrift during a storm. We are shown from Nagara's perspective how that day occurred. Nagara first goes into the school and walks by an injured bird that he debates on helping. Ultimately, he walks by it. We then see Nagara called into a meeting with the teacher because Nagara's mother hasn't signed some kind of permission slip. The teacher mentions that he is worried about Nagara's mental health. Shortly after, Nagara goes to the roof where he's confronted by Natsume and lightning strikes. This same scene is referenced again at the midpoint of the show when the students fail in their attempt at escape. Only this time, Hoshi gets to the bird before Nagara and it's implied that he kills it. Once again, the teacher and Nagara have a meeting, but this time the teacher's now grown visibly frustrated by Nagara's inability to make a decision. He thinks Nagara's mental health has declined even further, and that he has killed the bird. Nagara goes back to the roof, but instead of the box with the bird in it, there's the ripped up rulebook in its place. In this timeline, Natsume is missing, and it's implied that she has already died. Why show these scenes again? They show all this because this is the real world. This is the world the students are trying to get back to, and the one they are having direct effect on. These scenes are a display of Nagara's character progression. At the beginning of the show, we are shown that Nagara is an indecisive person and wants to change. At the midpoint of the show, Nagara has failed to change and subsequently has failed to return the students home. Sonny Boy is juxtaposing these two series of scenes to show that the real world is a reflection of Nagara in the stasis world. Based off of this comparison, it would stand to reason that at the end of the show, we're going to see these same scenes repeated. Only this time, we can predict that Nagara will be able to make a decision on his future, and if the show wants to have a happy ending, Nozomi is going to be alive, and we'll see the bird flying off into the sky. This is going to happen because Nagara's character arc will have been completed, and he will have made a new world. We can assume he will have made a new world in the Stasis universe, and he will have finally gone from an indecisive person to a decisive one. Now that we know the ending, this potentially confirms another theory. If the events of the show are directly contingent upon Nagara's journey and whether or not he's successful, then it would be safe to assume that the events of the show all take place in Nagara's head. This is hinted at in episode 6 when we learn that all of the film in the film world is from Nagara's perspective. He is the only one who can edit the film and the fabric of their reality. The principal builds off this when he tells Nagara that the students are merely copies of other students. They are not real. That is why Nagara is the only one who is capable of changing the world, and why Nagara's internal struggle is externalized to the show's main conflict. This plays into the meta-narrative, where the characters of Sonny Boy only exist if we, the viewer, watch the show. It's the age-old adage, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. This would also explain why Hoshi and some of the other students do not want him to succeed. If the world only exists because Nagara believes that it does, then once he wakes up, the other students will cease to exist, at least in their current form. Hoshi knows this with absolute certainty, which is why he attempts to keep everything the same. If Nagara does not change, then Hoshi's world will not end. Which leads us to the next part. What is Hoshi's relationship to the principal, and why is he God? The answer is Hoshi is the principal. The show goes out of its way to foreshadow this through various scenes and dialogue. Hoshi is always referring to himself as a savior. He talks like he is God, and the principal's voice directly comes out of Hoshi's mouth.
私はね、君たちを救いたいんだ.
The two even look alike and even have the same haircut. If we were to examine this shot, it all but confirms that the two are indeed the same person. The director mentions the students are copies of one another, and the show just so happens to overlay Hoshi and the director right on top of one another. So what does this mean? If Hoshi is in fact the god of Sonny Boy, then that calls into question the motives and validity of the principal. I do not think it's a coincidence that the principal is dressed up as Dr. Strangelove, a character that is portrayed as the central antagonist of his own film. Like Strangelove, the principal is manipulating people through various means to create chaos in the story. He does this as a form of entertainment. The events of Sonny Boy are a game to him. This occurs for two reasons. The first reason is a narrative one. Hoshi wants to keep everyone playing his game. That is why he is so hell-bent on the rules. As long as the other students are trapped in his maze, the game will never end, and they will all continue to exist. The second reason is because Hoshi/God/Aki are a stand-in for the actual director of the show. Going back to the meta conversation, if Nagara is the viewer, and Sonny Boy is a metaphorical maze of a television show, then the antagonist would have to be the person who created the game, Natsume Shingo. This is implied in episode 4 when Cap talks about the Monkey Baseball League. Not only is the baseball game a metaphor for society as a whole, but it is also a metaphor for the television show. Shingo wanted to play in the game as well and made himself as a copy in Sonny Boy. That is why the monkey umpire who controls the rules of the game only has one arm. This is a reference to the director who, as Strangelove, coincidentally has one hand covered. They are the same person. The director has been behind the scenes watching from behind home plate this entire time. And as Hoshi, he is watching from the back of the classroom as events unfold. But obviously we can't watch Sonny Boy forever. Games do not go on forever. The show will eventually have to come to an end. And if the baseball game is a metaphor for the show, then I believe that the principal's demise is foreshadowed by this scene from episode 4. As previously mentioned, the principal is the umpire. Asakaze is the pitcher, leaving Nagara the batter. Asakaze is being built up by Aki, who is a proponent of God. Like the pitcher, all the hopes and dreams of the other players are propped up on Asakaze. However, he cannot stop Nagara from winning the game. This is because he is going against resolving the central conflict. He is stagnant and he doesn't want to leave stasis, whereas Nagara is actively trying to return the students home. Like the pitcher, Asakaze will walk the batter. If the show follows this line of thought, then the other students will turn on God or one of his surrogates, more than likely Miss Aki, whose true identity will be revealed. So now that we know that Asakaze cannot save the students, how will Nagara get everyone back to reality and resolve the game? Again, this is all speculation as there is nothing concrete to go on. However, with all that being said, I believe that this scene from episode 5 foreshadows the students involved in creating the new world.
よし、この世界からネズミを解放しよう。この世界にも希望がないわけじゃない。ネズミの革命者を助けて、この世界の仕組みを置き換える。黄金が絶対じゃない世界。違う価値観のステージもあるはずだよ。
Nagara will more than likely require Mizuho, Asakaze, and Nozomi in order to set the students free from the stasis maze. Asakaze may initially refuse, but if Aki's true self is revealed, then Asakaze may look past his own ego to help Nagara. I believe that Nagara will need them based off of what these characters represent. Nagara is a representation of potential or willpower, Nozomi is a representation of hope, Mizuho represents abundance or resources, and Asakaze is a representation of skill or ability. In order to potentially build a new world, you need to have hope for a brighter future, you have to have the desire or the willpower to do it, you need to have the resources, and you have to have the skill or ability to make it happen. On a side note, it might be possible that Nagara may also require the rest of the students in order to make a new world, as the show may be pointing out that you need all of society present to make a real change. Nevertheless, with the help of the other students, Nagara will create a new world. This will be the world previously shown at the beginning and midpoints of the show. However, this time, Nagara will finally be able to make decisions for his future and rescue the bird. The only thing that might end up being a potential problem is if Nozomi doesn't get to continue living. If Sonny Boy wants to have a happy ending, then Nozomi will get to exist with the others at the end. However, I could also see the show throwing a curveball with her fate. It is mentioned that some of the students had their abilities prior to the school going adrift, and that students from different points in time can all exist at the same time in the stasis world. In episode 6, Nozomi drops a subtle line about the school graduation taking her back, and Mizuho quickly corrects her that it hasn't happened yet. But what if this has already happened for Nozomi? The only thing that we know about Nozomi prior to the show is that she is supposedly a foreign exchange student. That is seemingly why she wears a different uniform. But it could also be that she is a student from the past or the future. It is implied in episode 5 that she may have a terminal illness. These clues may be hinting at the true nature of Nozomi's identity, that she is in fact a student from the past who has already passed away. Nagara may have to come to grips with this reality, or he may have to shape a new reality to change the past or future. Only time will tell, but this will ultimately be left up to Natsume Shingo and what he has planned for the rest of Sonny Boy. Sonny Boy is the show all about us, the audience. Its main purpose is to serve as a reflection of our current world and the complacency of our own lives. Like Nagara, most of us live as a passive participant in life. We follow the rules and guidelines set before us by society, never questioning if there's a better way. Instead, we would rather spend our days lying around as time passes us by. Similar to the characters in Sonny Boy, we are living in stasis. We are the ones marooned on a desert island, with the tide slowly eroding our shores. Eventually, that island will sink, we will drown, and our world will fall. Our only hope is to rise to Natsume Shingo's challenge and take action. We shape our own realities, and as Nagara, we have the power to make a new world. So there you have it. We are finally at the end of the video. If you're able to make it through the whole thing, I congratulate you. I hope you found it somewhat entertaining. Hopefully I come close on some of my predictions, but anything can happen. Let me know what you think of my analysis. Was I spot on? Was I close? Or did I miss the mark completely? Regardless, I had a lot of fun making this video, and I had even more fun watching Sonny Boy. It's been a crazy show that has occupied my headspace for the better part of 11 weeks. Natsume Shingo has made a top tier anime and deserves all the credit in the world. I've enjoyed every episode immensely, and it'll be sad to see it go. Please recommend it to anybody you know. A show this good deserves to be seen. Once again, thanks again for watching, and have a nice day.